This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. What I'm not sure about is if our lives have been so different from the lives of the people we save. We all complete. Maybe none of us really understand what we've lived through, or feel we've had enough time. It's Never Let Me Go, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. Quick editor's note before we get going. We're back on the old mics. I didn't like the new mics. They didn't quite capture the timbre that I wanted. So we're going back to the old mics for now. That's why it sounds a little bit different again. But it sounds like it did for like most of the show's history. So there you go. We have every single one of our segments. So we're going to get right into it with Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
If you have not read or watched Never Let Me Go, here is a brief summary sourced from Wikipedia. And this one actually is fairly brief. It actually does a pretty good job of just summarizing things and not like doing every single detail from the film. A medical breakthrough has extended the human lifespan beyond 100 years. In 1978, the young Kathy H., along with her friends Tommy D. and Ruth C., spend their childhood at Hailsham, a traditional boarding school. The teachers, called guardians, encourages students to be health conscious and create artwork, the best of which is accepted into the gallery run by the mysterious Madame. They have little other contact with the world beyond the school's fences. Miss Lucy, a perceptive new guardian, tells her class that they exist to be organ donors and are destined to die, or complete, early in their adulthoods. She is quickly fired by the headmistress, Miss Emily. As time passes, Kathy grows attracted to Tommy and Ruth wins him, but Ruth wins him for herself despite having engaged in teasing him. 7 years later, Kathy, Ruth, Tommy, now young adults, are rehoused in the cottages on a farm, where they are allowed to drive away on day trips, but they remain reclusive, lacking social skills and resigned to their fate. The trio meet others from similar schools who claim that Hailsham students are privileged, and it is revealed that they are all clones. They discuss rumors of deferrals to organ donations that might be granted to clones who are in love, and the nature of the people they were cloned from, whom they unsuccessfully search for in books and out at the seaside. Tommy, still partnered with Ruth, is convinced that the gallery serves as verification for their deferrals, since artwork reveals the soul, and laments his lack of creativity. Ruth spites a lonely Kathy, claiming that Tommy never thought of her as more than a friend. Kathy leaves, enlisting as a post-operative carer for her fellow clones. Another 9 years later, Kathy has watched many donors gradually die as their organs are harvested. Having not seen Ruth or Tommy since she left the cottages, she comes across Ruth frail after 2 donations. They seek out Tommy to make a nostalgic seaside trip. Ruth reveals that she only seduced Tommy because she was afraid to be alone, and that she is consumed with guilt and wishes to help Tommy and Kathy seek a deferral. She leaves them with the address of Madame, who she believes has the power to help them, and soon dies on the operating table. Kathy and Tommy finally enter a relationship, and Tommy explains to Kathy, now his carer, that he has been creating artwork in the hope that it will earn them their deferral. The couple successfully bring the artwork to Madame, but she remains distant, suddenly inviting Miss Emily to come and speak to them. They reveal the deferrals are indeed a myth, and that the gallery was merely curated to affirm the basic humanity of clones in a wide appeal for their ethical treatment. Hailsham, now shut down, was the last institution to value young clones as all but human. Kathy and Tommy leave in disappointed silence, but Tommy explodes with grief and anger mid-journey as he used to as a child. Tommy dies on his 4th donation, leaving Kathy alone as hers begin. Contemplating the ruins of her childhood, she questions in voiceover how different her life has been from normal people's. That is a summary of Never Let Me Go. We have, like I said, every single segment, so we're going to get right in to Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay?
She had a squat, almost bulldoggy figure and odd black hair. When it grew, It grew upwards, so it never covered her ears or her chunky neck.
I have no idea who this could be. Trying to think. Obviously, our main character is Ruth Kathy. Kathy, I know is the narrator. I would assume similar to the film, so it's probably not her. This does not remotely sound like Ruth, like at all, because Ruth is is Keira Knightley, but she does have dark hair, and it's because it doesn't fit any of the other like characters that I can think of. I guess I'll say it's Ruth, but I find that surprising.
It's not Ruth. This is Miss Lucy.
Oh, okay. Also doesn't really.
No. Doesn't really fit Sally Hawkins.
No.
At all.
No, Sally Hawkins is not squat, bulldoggy figured or have weird, odd hair. Like, no. Sally Hawkins is an angel. I don't understand why. Definitely did not follow the description in the book for her casting in this one. Okay. But yeah, fair enough.
All right. Up next. She was a tall, narrow woman with short hair, probably quite young still, though at the time we wouldn't have thought of her as such. She always wore a sharp gray suit.
So this one I think I know. It could be one of two main people. I think the two would either be Miss Emily, who is like the head mistress of the school, or Madam, who is the person who runs the gallery. I am inclined to say, because I think she does wear a gray suit, that this is Miss Emily, the headmistress.
This is actually Madam.
Okay, it was one of the two. I could have swore that Miss Emily like wears like a gray suit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they both do. I don't remember, but yeah, like I said, I knew it was one of the two.
Okay, last one. She wasn't especially tall, but something about the way she carried herself, always very straight with her head right up, made you think she was. She wore her silvery hair tied back, but strands were always coming loose and floating around her.
Okay, well, I gotta assume that this is probably Miss Emily, because I'm trying to think of who else it could be, and there's not really anybody jumping out at me as to like main characters that would be important that we haven't mentioned. Again, it could be Ruth, but she doesn't have silvery hair. I guess it could be Ruth, but I'm inclined to say that this is Miss Emily.
It is Miss Emily.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think she does have like silvery hair. She's middle aged when the story starts. So, all right, I have lots of questions. Let's get into it. Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So the film opens up on Carey Mulligan, who plays Kathy. She is. We'll find out later. She is a carer, who is somebody who helps the people, the clones who do the donations, the organ donations, kind of helps them through their care after their surgeries. And she is watching Andrew Garfield, who we know nothing about their relationship at this point, kind of being put onto an operating table. And we hear her voiceover, and she kind of talks about how she thinks now, she looks backward more than forward. I actually have the quote here in a minute. We'll talk about specifically what the quote is. But she kind of starts reminiscing about her past, and specifically the past of herself, Tommy, and Ruth, which are the three friends that we follow for the majority of the story. And so the film does this kind of like, we start at the end and then come back to it eventually. Then we jump back in time and then come back, kind of almost like a frame story. It's non-linear, but it's not like like we jump around in time. We just start towards the end.
And we kind of loop back
and then catch back up to where we started, which I'm sure has there's a specific name for that type of non-linear. There's got to be, and I don't know what it is. Where we start at like, basically, if a story is A, B, C, D, E, we start at like D, loop back to A, and then follow through,
make our way back
to D, and then forward from there to finish out. Very common, obviously, but I want to know if the book follows a similar. And again, I'm sure there's a specific name for that, but does the book follow that kind of similar structure for how the story is told?
So the book does have a similar nonlinear structure. It's structured around this idea of Kathy like reminiscing and looking back on her life. There are a couple exceptions from the way that the movie's structured. But one is that Tommy's already dead at the beginning of the book.
Oh, okay.
So we don't pop back to like right as he's about to die,
Yeah.
basically. The other is that the book jumps around more. The movie, like we just said, is more or less linear.
Yeah.
Once we go back to Kathy's childhood and then works its way back to the opening scene, the book is not really set up like that. We kind of jump around quite a bit
Okay.
in the book. If I'm being honest, I preferred the movie's approach. The book, it wasn't, it was fine.
Yeah.
But it also used this kind of specific device as it was jumping around that got a little bit tiresome
Okay.
after about 50
Interesting.
pages in. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was something I noticed that, like, after it kept repeating, I was like, okay, all
Yeah.
right, I get it. So I tried to find a couple of examples, but it would do this thing where it would end sections and chapters with kind of like, I don't even really know how to describe it. Almost a not a cliffhanger, but like a tease,
Yeah,
like
right.
a little sting
Yes.
at the end.
A sting from the perspective of current day
Yeah.
Kathy reflecting
Yes.
on.
Reflecting. So a couple examples that I pulled are, and if all these incidents now seem full of significance and all of a piece, it's probably because I'm looking at them in the light of what came later, particularly what happened that day at the pavilion while we were sheltering from the downpour. And then it would go back and start back at the beginning of this pavilion story. And then sometimes, like, within those stories, it would, like, do it again and loop back to another event.
Yeah.
And then return to the original story. Another example that I just flipped through real quick and found a couple was what happened after that row over the chess illustrates pretty well the point I'm making. And then the chapter
go back
ends, and then the next chapter
Yeah.
starts up
So
again with.
it's kind of like a reverse reverse cliffhanger almost.
Yeah.
Where you're cliffhangering it from by teasing, but
Yeah.
without like that is interesting. I can see how if that repeating that a lot could become a little.
It became just a little tedious
Okay.
after a while.
Yeah, I think it can be effective.
Really the only complaint that I have with the prose.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. I will say that I thought the opening lines of the movie, which I mentioned earlier, kind of evoke that a little bit. Where we as Kathy is watching Tommy go onto the operating table, we hear her voiceover, and she says a bunch of stuff, but then at the end she says, "I suppose that's why I now spend most of my time not looking forwards, but looking back to the cottages in Hailsham and what happened to us there, me, Tommy, and Ruth." Again, kind of like teasing where we're about to jump back and go see.
Yes.
It's kind of a similar. It's not the exact same, but it's a similar idea. So I do think the movie kind of played with that a little bit in that kind of style, but yeah. So then we do jump back and see their childhood. We jump back 20 years or so, because at the point that the story starts in the film, Kathy is 28, she says, and we jump back to when they appear to be 8, 9, 10, something like that. And they're at herself, Tommy, and Ruth all attend the school Hailsham, which is this private like boarding school kind of thing, which we will slowly learn what it is and why it exists. But initially, we don't really know much about it. But one of the kind of early things that kind of hints us that something's going on is there's this story of, or they talk about they're at recess one day, and their new teacher, Miss Lucy, a ball goes over a fence, and Tommy, I think specifically, like, it doesn't want to go get it, is too afraid to go over the fence and get it. And they relay to her after the teacher, she's like, "Why didn't you go get the ball?" They're like, "Well, if you go over the fence, these horrible things will happen." And they talk about like one kid was found like murdered and another kid like disappeared or something. And I wanted to know if the school had this kind of built-in mythos of what happens if you go over the fence to kind of keep kids from trying to escape, essentially.
Yeah. Yes, it does, with one difference. In the book, those stories are about what happens if they go into the woods that surround Hailsham.
Yeah.
Not a fence, specifically.
Similar.
Yeah, similar.
Very, very much.
And actually, I think the stories that they relay are like exactly
Basically
the same.
exactly the same, yeah. And his fence is just easier in that context.
Yes.
So, like, because they don't have, depending on where they were filming, if the tree line wasn't particularly close, they could have done it with a tree line and a ball going into the woods, but if they didn't, just filming logistically, they can just make it the fence and it works the same way. So that works. Then we move forward a little bit and we see that it's explained that Tommy has a bit of a temper, and he likes things in a particular way. He has a shirt, it's like his favorite shirt and stuff, and blah blah blah. And the other kids tend to pick on him because he is so easy to like rile up. And specifically included in the group of the kids that pick on Tommy is Ruth, who is one of our main characters, who we'll come to know more later, and ultimately ends up in a relationship with Tommy. And I wanted to know if that backstory for Tommy being picked on and Ruth specifically being one of the bullies was part of that, of his backstory or of his childhood.
Yeah, this is pretty spot on. Tommy has an awful temper in the book, very easy to rile up. Yeah, the other kids get a kick out of winding him up and making him kind of pop off. And that does include Ruth, at least to some extent. She doesn't bully him in the same way that some of the other kids do.
Yeah.
But which is similar to what we see in the movie.
It's
But
not
she's
like
still,
as mean.
yeah,
but
she's still like
part
not
of it.
particularly nice to him.
One of the other things we see here pretty early that I thought was kind of fascinating is they have this thing, it has a name, or I can't remember, it's like a special day or something like that, where the students acquire, I guess, some sort of tokens or coins, or I can't remember what they call them. Tokens throughout the year. And then every so often, a bunch of some guys from the local town show up with boxes full of like junk.
Yeah.
Essentially. And they dump it all over the tables in the cafeteria. And then the kids use their tokens to like buy these, like, it's like broken toys and it's literally just like if you went to like the like a Goodwill, but not like a regular Goodwill, like the one where you dig through the bins of just stuff.
Yeah, the bins.
Yeah. It's like they take those bins and just kind of dump them on the tables and let the kids like fight over the scraps. And I wanted to know if that particular little vignette came from the book, because I thought that was a very interesting, a little bit of like world building, and not even world building, but kind of setting up what is going on with these children and what their kind of place in this world is.
Yeah. So yes, this is exactly the same as it is in the book. They call them sales.
Yeah.
But I really liked getting to see this, like the visual of it helped a lot, I think. Like getting to see the bits of these broken, discarded things.
Yeah.
Really drives home that these kids are getting the leftovers that nobody else wants.
Yeah.
It's not even like thrift store stuff.
No, it's
like
literally
thrift
like
store
pieces
rejects.
of toys.
Yeah.
And like, it is literally like the stuff they couldn't sell at Goodwill even, or whatever, basically. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting in kind of is like a weird inversion juxtaposition to what ultimately the fate of these children's are, where their parts are being sold off, but parceled out and given to other people, kind of inverting that and having them the only joy they in their early life, kind of the only place they get toys and fun things and their own like possessions is from the discarded scraps from other people. That wasn't kind of an interesting bit of symbolism there, but anyways. I thought that scene was kind of clever. I really enjoyed it. So we move forward a little bit more, and we don't really know much about Lucy, this teacher of theirs that they have. I think they say she's a fourth year teacher or something like that. They're in their fourth year or something. I don't know. And she just kind of one day in the middle of class just dumps the explanation of what is going on to both us and the students in the class. She's just like, okay, so I know you guys know a little bit of what's going on, but here's what's going on. You guys are being grown so we can harvest your organs and give them to other people, and you will die when you're 30 or whatever. Or, you will die eventually after we harvest enough of your organs. All the kids are just kind of sitting there in stunned silence. And I thought it was an interesting scene. It feels a little out of nowhere. It just feels like not sure we got enough of what motivated her to make this sort of proclamation, to just kind of dump this on the kids. I feel like maybe there was a scene or two earlier in the film that may have been cut, like showing the motivations that led to her kind of doing this. Because it does seem to kind of just come out of nowhere. It was one of my only complaints with the movie. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess you're just telling them. Still a good scene and really interesting, and the reactions on all the kids' faces. It's very well acted and everything. But I wanted to know if that scene came from the book and if it felt similarly sort of like out of nowhere.
So The specific scene does happen in the book, and the movie's version is fairly similar. There are slight differences, but it's pretty similar. And I really did like it as a movie scene. I like the pouring rain with
Yeah.
everything else in this kind of stark silence. Very moody, very evocative.
Yeah.
Good stuff. However, I do think that what gets lost in the movie is the really interesting way that Ishiguro threads information through the story, both for the reader and for the characters. And in the book, it's interesting because they definitely already know what they are and what their purpose is when Miss Lucy gives them this talk. They've never been told in such an upfront manner
Right.
as how she does it, but it's been kind of like subtly in the background for the entire time. And it is interesting because Kathy isn't like surprised or disturbed by the information. Like it's not a revelation to
Right.
her,
Yeah.
but it does make her start to kind of like question and think about how her guardians have approached the topic previously.
Yeah.
And I think the movie tries to nod to that by having Miss Lucy start with the problem is you've been told and not told, which is a line directly from this scene in the book.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it succeeds at this aspect of the story the way that the book does.
Yeah. I'll take your word for that. I will say that I definitely got my issue with the scene in the movie isn't, I got the vibe that the kids were at least somewhat aware.
Yeah.
It's not like I felt like she was completely blindsiding them with this information in this scene and that they had no idea. I will say that I think the movie does give you enough to know, again, the line you're talking about, the problem is you've been told and not told, and their reaction isn't like completely like stunned or like they have no idea. I definitely, and watching that scene, got the impression that the kids were at least somewhat aware of their fate and what was going on and that sort of thing. To me, I was more surprised by how sort of early in the film for us as an audience, it was just bluntly put out there. And I think the bigger issue for me was I didn't know, and this is maybe the question I have is, and I don't know if you have an answer necessarily, but the bigger question for me was what I said earlier is I was missing what her motivation was in this moment to be so blunt. Whereas before I didn't, in the lead up to this moment in the film, I didn't really see much from her to set up this sort of like explanation now all of a sudden. You know what I'm saying? Like I just didn't see where, like I don't know what the turning point was for her character to kind of just do this.
So,
and I don't know if the book maybe has, like, if there's more lead up in the book and why she decides to tell the kids this in this way.
So I can't remember exactly what the plot point lead up to this is. There is one.
Okay.
There's some, it might have been the whole thing with like the tokens and the gallery, because there's this whole like aspect of the culture at Hailsham that the movie excises, which is that in addition to like the sales that we see, they also have exchanges where they can trade tokens for other students' artwork.
Oh.
The stuff that doesn't go to the galleries.
Yeah.
Which I totally get why the movie cuts that, because I think we have enough going on.
Yeah.
But then there's this like whole controversy where the kids are like, well, it's not fair that if your stuff goes to the gallery that you can't get tokens for it, so we should be getting tokens for it, which then brings up this issue of like, well, why does our stuff go to the gallery? And obviously they're not going to tell them that, but if my memory is serving me, I think that trying to navigate that whole conversation is what ends up motivating Miss Lucy to tell them this in the book.
I could see that. And it's not that there's nothing in the movie. Like she has some conversations with Tommy about the art and stuff, and there's some little moments here and there that serve a little bit to lead to this. It just still felt like there wasn't enough to trigger this big like I'm just gonna come right out and tell you this thing that nobody else says and that is clearly I'm not supposed to tell you because she's immediately like fired or whatever for it. or worse. We don't actually know, but yeah, she's at least fired for it because she does not work at the school anymore immediately following this. Is she also subsequently fired for telling the kids this?
I'm pretty sure she was not. I tried to look back, and I don't think she was. Happy to be corrected, but I believe that was a movie edition.
Which is interesting because it works in the movie in kind of two ways. It's actually pretty clever having her be quote unquote or fired or whatever, because initially it feels like the Lady Emily or Miss Emily is like getting rid of her for telling the kids this and blah blah blah, but we will find out that it's actually a different reason once we kind of get the reveal of what Miss Emily's whole deal was later.
Yeah.
And it works both ways.
Yeah.
Like it works if you think she was fired because they like are kind of keeping this a secret from the kids and they don't want them to know, but it also works with the twist we get later, which we'll talk about more later, of kind of what Miss Emily's actual motivation is. So I thought that was clever. I thought it worked. The fact that it works in both readings of Miss Emily's character, I thought is kind of cool. So then we move forward in time a little bit, and Ruth and Tommy get together. This disappoints Kathy greatly as she has a crush on Tommy, and she has kind of been in love with Tommy, quote unquote, for a long time. But then Ruth and Tommy end up together, and I want to know if that's kind of the main a relationship drama in the film or in the book.
Yes, yeah, it is. The movie follows that whole entanglement.
Yeah,
pretty much exactly.
I mean, I had a feeling that would be the case because it does seem pretty pivotal to the whole story, but wasn't sure. So we jump forward in time. They're now teenagers. It says, I think we move forward like 7 years. They're probably like 16 or 17.
I think in the book it specifically says they go to the cottages at 16.
Yeah. So yeah, teenagers now, and they're kind of living on their own in this the cottages, which is like a farm, which we'll talk more about later. But they're on their own. They have like a chaperone guy who kind of like does stuff for them, but they're mostly kind of left to their own devices to kind of do whatever they want. And so they're there with a couple other people from a different school, Domhnall Gleeson and his girlfriend, who are a couple. And then Ruth and Tommy are a couple. And Kathy's just kind of on her own. And everybody's having sex all the time except for Kathy. And it's kind of awkward for her. But she ends up finding some like Playboys or whatever. And she's in the barn, like flipping through them. And Tommy walks in. And she's like flipping through this magazine, like really quick, like, you know, she's just like paging through it basically and not really stopping to look particularly at any of the fun pictures in the thing. And there's this great exchange where Tommy comes in and sees her doing it. And they're kind of talking about it. And he goes, it doesn't work like that. You have to go slower and look at each picture. Like it doesn't, you can't just flip through it. That's not really the point. And Kathy turns to him and says, how do you know what works for girls? Which I thought was hilarious. And I wanted to know if that exchange came from the book.
So there is a scene where Tommy catches Kathy looking through the porn magazines.
Yeah.
But this specific exchange is not from the book. But I also really liked it.
I love the implication that what works for girls is speed reading nudie magazines. Like that's just...
We're very efficient.
I just thought it was very funny because it's honestly, if anything, it's an inverse of like that idea, you know, of what you'd expect. Like, yeah, it's just I thought that was very funny. But we will find out later that Tommy does actually realize what she's doing in that scene. It's kind of interesting. The movie doesn't really allude to this much, and I don't know if I have a question or a note about it later. But we'll find out later that Ruth is like, "Oh, Tommy told me about you looking at the nude magazines." And I know what you're doing. You're trying to get him, you know, you're basically trying to like broach the topic of sex with Tommy to try to like get in with him or whatever. Tommy later is like, well, I knew you weren't when they're talking about it years and years later. He's like, no, I knew that's not what you were doing. I knew you were looking for your possible. And they have this very interesting thing where Kathy talks about how she had these like sexual desires and she didn't really know what to do with it because they didn't really ever explain this to them. Like, they didn't really get very good comprehensive sex education in Hailsham or whatever. So she didn't really know what to do with these sexual desires. So she thought there was like maybe not something wrong with her, but that there must be a reason for it, or that she was weird or something like that for having the desires. And so she thought maybe the reason she had these sexual desires was that the person she was cloned from was like a porn star. And like that's why she's like this. So she was going through this magazine to see if she could find her original, is what they call the people they're cloned from. And I thought that was interesting. Again, I don't think I have another note about it later, but I thought that was a fascinating little discussion. It doesn't really, it's not super important to everything that goes on, but it's, again, super interesting. But speaking of kind of the naivete of our characters and not really understanding sex or any of that kind of stuff very well, I wanted to know if that comes from the book, if all of our main characters, the main three we follow, Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy, are all fairly stunted and naive to the world because they grew up in this very sheltered boarding school. And then now that they're out on their own, they don't really, again, they have like a guy who kind of like looks after them, but it's not like a, it's not like a teacher or anything. He's just like there.
He just like brings them supplies.
Yeah, and like works on his truck and stuff. Yeah, he's not really involved with them in any way. But I just thought all of their interactions, both with each other and other people, were like fascinating. And I thought all the performances, they did a really good job of kind of capturing this. It feels almost alien the way they kind of interact with not only the outside world, which makes sense, but even each other just feels off in a way that I thought was beautifully rendered and like felt very realistic for the kind of upbringing these kids had and how they would interact with the world and each other. And I wanted to know if that dynamic was from the book. I assume it was, but
as this is both very similar to the book and kind of different. In the book, I would say that most of this like kind of stuntedness that you're referring to comes through in their interactions with each other and like the way that they perceive each other's actions and motivations. And the movie, I thought, gave us a little bit more of them not knowing how to navigate the outside world than the book did, which makes perfect sense. And I particularly enjoyed the scene where they're at the diner and they just have no idea how to choose and order food.
Yeah, that and then the they don't know. I also, it cracked me up when they're going to the diner, Domhnall Gleeson or whatever. It's like, so you guys got a lot of experience at the outside, or you guys know, or something like that. And Ruth is just like, oh yeah, and Tommy's like, no, we don't. And she's like, oh, shut up. I just thought it was very funny. But I think because like ultimately this whole thing ends up, and we'll get into this more, I'm sure, throughout, but ultimately this whole thing ends up kind of being an allegory for just life generally. Yeah. Like we're exploring mortality and relationships through this very specific sci-fi scenario, but it is very much just about all of us. And this particular section and the way, like, their inability to interact with each other and the outside world is really just a heightened exploration of the way all of us have a hard time kind of finding our place, and specifically at that young, awkward teenage phase, not really knowing how to interact with people and how what is expected of us, and like
getting
things wrong a lot and not really knowing what, who we are and what we want to do at that point in our lives. I thought it was again, it's all just like a heightened version of that. To kind of explore, I think, that stage of our life that most of us, I think, go through. I think some people get through that very quickly. But I think for a lot of us, it takes, I don't feel like I became a real adult till I was like 25, 20, at least. At least. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like
late 20s.
Yeah. Like where I finally felt like, oh yeah, I have a pretty, like good grasp on like emotionally, like what I'm doing and where I'm going and like what, I don't know, like how and just like being able to like interact with people in a way that I feel is at least somewhat meaningful and isn't just very surface level. Like I felt like it took me a long time to get there. And I think a lot of people kind of experience that. And I think this whole story kind of just ends up being like boiling down because of their shortened lifespans. It kind of boils that down into like a condensed and heightened time frame, which I thought was really interesting. And we'll talk more about some of that stuff later, but yeah. Just super, super fascinating. So we find out in the film around this time that the main characters are clones. We didn't really realize that in the film.
Yeah.
Until this point, kind of it's just disclosed to us that they're clones. And specifically, we find out that they're clones of people that kind of just exist in the world. And Domhnall Gleeson and his girlfriend, I don't remember their names, but they, because they're only in the movie for like 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
They, while they were out on a trip, they saw somebody that they think was Ruth's original, which they call the original is the person you're cloned from, and people that they think might be the original are possibles until they confirm they're original. So they say that there's a possible or whatever, and she works as like a receptionist at some like travel agency or something. And so they gotta go. They go on a trip to see if they can find her and if it is actually Ruth's clone, or if Ruth is this woman's clone. And I wanted to know if any of that came from the book, because I thought it was really interesting.
So yes, they are clones. That part of the plot / conflict is exactly the same.
Yeah.
The trip to see Ruth's possible takes up a larger chunk of the book than it does the movie, but it is from the book.
Yeah, there's a great moment, and I think we're actually jumping. I'm jumping because my next question is actually from before this, I think. But there's a great moment where they do go to see the woman who they think is Ruth's original, or potentially her possible. And they're like looking through the window of this travel agency, and it's this great, which you posted on social media quite a bit, and it's on like posters and stuff. And it's because it's very on the nose. It's not super subtle what we're doing here visually, symbolically. But that being said, still done really well, in my opinion. There's this great shot where we get a wide of Ruth, Tommy, and Kathy all peering through this window with their hands on the window, so they can see kind of like through the window.
Noses pressed against the glass.
Pressed to the glass, hands on the glass, kind of shielding the light so they can look through the window. And it's just, again, just this great visual representation of just kind of boiled down their whole existence of them as outsiders looking in, separated from quote unquote the real world by this barrier. Again, pretty on the nose, relatively speaking. But again, I just thought it was executed pretty wonderfully, and it's a great shot. It's very, I don't know. I thought it was delightful. I liked a lot of the kind of like subtle or not so subtle imagery in this film. I say not subtle. It's not that it's like super on the nose, but it's very clear what's.
Yeah, it's very clear what's being communicated.
I don't think it takes I don't think you need to be have a PhD in film studies to like grasp what is going on here. But that being said, I don't think it's not like the most obvious symbolism we've ever seen, but it is like pretty good, or pretty obvious what's going on.
Well, it's well executed and well shot, and it looks really nice.
And it works for the scene. It's also not like, and it's also not like,
it's not shoehorned in.
Yes, it's not shoehorned in a way that doesn't really like work, where it's like, well, why is this even a thing? Like it doesn't, or like, why would they even do that? Or why would they stand like, it works within the scene to where you don't really think about it too much, but it still works metaphorically, which there's a handful of moments like that throughout the movie. But I thought that was a good one. So actually jumping back slightly in the film's narrative here, before they go look at Ruth's clone, who ends up not being her clone, they're at a diner, like getting some lunch. And while they're getting lunch, Domhnall Gleeson and his girlfriend, they ask the Hailsham kids, because Domhnall Gleeson and his girlfriend are not from Hailsham. They're from a different school or different whatever. Yeah. And they ask if the Hailsham kids know about this deferral program. They've heard about this deferral thing that basically, if you're in love, if two clones are in love, they can apply for deferral, which basically defers their donations by a few years so they can spend some time together before they have to do their donations and then end up dying or whatever. Basically just buys them some extra time. And Domhnall Gleeson and his girlfriend are like asking them if they know about this because they want to apply for it. And they assume that these kids from Hailsham would know about it, because Hailsham is like, to the other cloned kids it's like the super fancy, like they're the like they lived in the lap of luxury. They know things. They like
it's
had a
like
much
the
better
Ivy League of these clone schools.
Yeah. So I want to know if any of that scene Because again, they're just hopeful that somehow maybe their love will forestall their fate, which again, just another fascinating little microcosm of just life in general. But I wanted to know if any of that scene came from the book, because I thought it was just a beautiful, heartbreaking scene. Also, I loved there's a little hint of kind of like manufactured, like kind of classism in there that maybe and it's actually, we'll find out, maybe not manufactured. That's kind of the interesting spoiler. But initially, when I was watching this, because we haven't revealed like the later twist in the film about Hailsham, in this moment, I thought maybe what was going on here when they're like, oh, your Hailsham kids are like special, and you guys get you guys had like the privileged upbringing or whatever. I was thinking like, oh, maybe what's going on here is the guardians or whatever, or the people in charge, the system, kind of inspires this, like injects this kind of classism or this like distrust of kids from the other schools into the ecosystem to keep the kids from like
from unionizing.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Basically manufactures their consent. That's not what the term, I know. But point being, like, maybe the system is kind of like introducing this false like antagonism between the schools in order to keep them from coalescing and joining together and blah blah blah. Again, we'll find out that's not really the case, but I thought that was interesting. Anyways, any of that come from the book?
So the scene where they're talking about deferrals is from the book, but it was absolutely gutting in the film.
It really,
First off, superb subtle acting.
Oh yeah,
from Domhnall Gleeson and the actress playing Chrissy, his girlfriend.
Yeah.
I think it also helped in the movie that we didn't interact with either of them as much as we do in the book, because in the book they're not assholes, but they're kind of jerks.
Oh, okay.
So I think it helped to not have that kind of a little bit of a bad taste in the back of your mouth in that scene.
Andrea Riseborough is Chrissy.
Mm-hmm. As far as the idea of the Hailsham kids being like that they're special or that they're given preferential treatment, I think that does get even more interesting at the end.
Yes,
like you mentioned. When we learn that Hailsham, it's one of only like 3 places that's making an effort to treat clones like people.
Yeah.
We find out.
Yeah. That's the quote unquote twist. It's not really a big twist.
It's not really a twist, but
kind of a reveal.
It's a thing that we learn. Yeah. So in a way they are correct.
Yeah.
They are getting better treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just not the way that they think.
Not in the way they think, yeah. Which that does paint it in a different light later, but yeah, it was interesting. And yeah, the scene is, like you said, it's gut wrenching. It's just heartbreaking because you see the kind of dawning realization when basically Ruth and them are like, we don't know anything about, I don't know what we're talking about. We don't know anything about a deferral program. We've never heard of that. And as they kind of realize that either it seems like, well, maybe this isn't a thing, or they just like the fact that they don't know about it or whatever, it kind of like dawns on them that they're like, okay, this is probably bullshit. And you can see that just kind of set in on them and they start like crying. It's just, I guess, like you said, it's just brilliantly, beautifully acted and just a heartbreaking scene. Like every scene in the movie, honestly, because spoilers, this movie's sad. This movie's very sad. It's good, but it's very sad. In a good way. It's the good kind of sad, but it is, it gets me. You know what this movie reminded me of, and we'll talk about more of that later, it's really reminded me of Arrival.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people I saw comparing it to some other stuff, which I think is fair. I definitely can see the similarities to like parts of like Remains of the Day and stuff for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the unrealized like potential and blah, 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 all this sort of stuff and things not said and all this sort of thing. But really parts of it, especially towards the end, reminded me of Arrival. We'll get to that in a second. But so eventually Tommy becomes convinced later on that that the gallery exists to take their art as a way to you mentioned earlier, the gallery comes to Hailsham, looks at their art and takes some of it. Tommy becomes convinced that the reason they take the art is so that they can look at it and see when kids do apply, when the clones do apply for deferral, if they're like, say they're in love, they then use the art the gallery uses the art to see if they're actually in love, whether or not, like, because they'll be able to see their souls essentially through the art. And in another heartbreaking scene, Tommy explains, well, Kathy, because he's saying this all to Kathy, and Kathy's like, well, you can, maybe you and Ruth can get a deferral or whatever. And and Tommy's like, no, because I'm not good at art, and none of my art ever got taken into the gallery.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if that, like, if Tommy's hypothesis in that scene and stuff came from the book, because again, just oof.
Yeah, that all is from the book. It's Tommy's big theory about what the gallery is, what its purpose might be. And like, he wasn't wrong.
No.
But he wasn't right either.
Yeah. He was kind of close to being right, but not quite.
He was in the ballpark.
Yeah. And I think, again, even the whole gallery thing, I think the thing I love about this movie is that that I really loved about the movie was that a lot of it doesn't give you any easy answers, kind of similar to some other stuff we covered, where there's not like an obvious message necessarily, like to anything, but everything is, there's so many ways you can interpret kind of everything that happens in the movie. And I thought, like, particularly like the gallery stuff really struck me, and like and Tommy's quest to like make art that was good enough for the gallery kind of echoes, I think, the way a lot of creatives and stuff, where we, that struggle to like find a purpose through art, or to like prove your kind of humanity through art. And again, to prove your own worth or your purpose, or
a legacy.
Yeah, to give yourself a legacy, or to prove that you're doing something meaningful because you're creating these things, or creating something, anything. Again, there's just it's the movie, I think, and it sounds like the book by extension, or opposite of that, the book, and by extension the movie, just kind of throws all this stuff out there. It kind of layers all this stuff in a way where it just lets you take what you want from it and apply it in a way. Because again, I think almost anybody could watch this and apply it, their own framework to it, in a way that was very meaningful to them. And I don't think I think very few interpretations of kind of what each of these things mean, or how each of these like elements of the story how each person who watches this movie could apply the elements of the story to their own life, I think are all like completely valid. And I think that's one of the things that's very like well hewn about the story, is that it doesn't force a simple reading of it, or it doesn't force like a specific reading of it necessarily.
I agree.
Like, there are definitely things that the movie wants you to kind of get out and think about, but it very much allows each individual viewer / reader to kind of just spread their own nonsense. And I say nonsense, their own insecurities, their own difficulties, their own pain and whatnot across the story in their own way. And I just thought it was kind of beautifully crafted in that way. But so I assume that all the terminology, because this book is a sci-fi, or this film is like a sci-fi story, ostensibly, like kind of.
It's sci-fi set in the past.
Yeah.
Which I always find interesting.
Yeah, and it's alternate universe, kind of alternate history, kind of sci-fi. And the sci-fi elements are very minimal.
Yes.
Like very minimal.
Yes.
But yeah, it basically but there are, because of that, there is some like lingo, there's the classic like news speak or whatever that exists, the slang that exists within this universe. In particular, some of the main standouts from the film are which we talked about two of these already, which is our originals and possibles. Possibles being people who might be the clone you're based on. Originals being the actual clone that you're based on, or that you're cloned from. But then the other one, the main, and there's more, but the other main one was completion, or completing, which is what happens. Basically, they're kind of code for dying after finishing your donation, or dying after a donation, or at some point during your donation process. No matter when that is, you could have donated multiple times, or you could have donated once or whatever. But if you die during that process or after or whatever, you have achieved completion or whatever. As kind of a what is it called when you soften a word? What is
a euphemism?
A euphemism. Thank you. As a euphemism for just dying, essentially. is completion. And I wanted to know if that lingo came from the book, because I thought it was, I assumed it did, but I thought it was worked well.
Yeah, all of that stuff does come from the book, all of that terminology. For me, completing and donation are maybe tied for the most dark and uncomfortable. It perfectly encapsulates, I think, the way that humans use euphemisms to soften things that they're not comfortable with or that they know is wrong.
Yes.
Or they want to deny complicity in.
Absolutely.
Completion, call it what it is, man.
Yeah, you're killing
them.
murdering these people. Yeah.
Donation is a wild. It's not a donation.
Not a donation.
They don't have a choice.
Zero choice there. Yeah, you are applying a whole lot of agency to something that
has no
agency whatsoever. And that's why I kind of compared it to Newspeak or whatever, where you're using these words in ways that do not apply.
Yes, you're using it to distance yourself from your wrongdoing.
Yes. In a way that creates a very dystopian, off-putting, but realistic feeling world. It does an immense amount of world building by just using subbing a handful of words out for other words.
Very, very masterful use of language, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So then we move forward in time again. We jump forward quite a bit more now, and they're quote unquote adults. They are adults. They're in their 20s at this point now. But in this, there's old age in this universe for the clones, because most of them seemingly, complete by around the age of 30 or so. And we meet up with everybody again. And I've skipped a lot of stuff here in the story because it's not really important for what we're talking about, but they've all gone their separate ways. Ruth and Tommy have broken up. Kathy becomes a carer who again provides like support and care for people during and after their donations. Ruth is in the middle of her donations and is struggling, like she's physically not doing well. And then Tommy is also doing his donations, but is seemingly like doing a lot better than Ruth is physically. But they all meet back up again, and they kind of decide to go on a little trip together. And they go to see this boat on the shore, this beached, old, rusty boat sitting on the shore. I assume that's a real boat. It looked like a real location.
It looked like a real boat, yeah.
It's probably in other movies. But anyways, so they go see this boat, and they're sitting in there to kind of discussing things. And I found it really striking that when they meet back up, later in life, our three main characters kind of encompass three different perspectives on this whole situation and this whole world that they're living in. Whereas Ruth has sort of cynically accepted her fate. She knows, this is all bullshit. She talks a lot about how like the euphemisms and the complete, like she talks about how like they were lied to and like blah, like she is very much knows that this is all bullshit and says it, and is like, she's also accepting. It's not like she's trying to like run away or fight it or anything like that. She's still like,
Yeah, but she's the angriest, we'll say, out of the three of them.
Tommy is still sort of naive and kind of living in this state of arrested development. He still has sort of this like childlike energy that he had when he was younger, and he still sort of has an exuberance and a joy that I think both Ruth and
a
Kathy lack.
More optimism than the other two, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense. And then on the other side of that, Kathy, as a carer, she's been through a lot of this. She's sort of peacefully existing within a state of like acceptance. Like she also kind of accepts what's going on. She's not like cynical about it in the way that Ruth is.
Yeah, and she's also in a way on the outside looking in.
Yes, because she, as a carer, your donations get deferred until after you're done being a carer, however long that lasts, seemingly till you're about 30 or so, because that's when they start Kathy's at the end of the film. But I thought it was interesting that they all kind of encapsulate a slightly different perspective on this world, and I wanted to know if the book, if that angle and their different personalities and perspectives came from the book.
I would say it's pretty accurate to the book.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting to kind of see this world through their three different eyes, and I think the movie does a really good job of translating that. Like the little moment of Tommy on the boat, like playing around,
Yeah, running
like,
around and like it's a playground.
Yeah, like it's a playground, and then and then Ruth is just like gaunt and like clearly dying and like in a terrible place, and she's just done with it all, and like just very cynical. And Kathy just again very like like you said, outside looking in, just kind of at peace with it all in like a weird, sad way. It's all very interesting. It's fascinating. So then during this scene, as they're sitting on the beach, Ruth apologizes. She basically says to Tommy and Kathy, look, I'm sorry that I was very selfish. I kept you guys apart, even though I didn't really love Tommy and I knew that wasn't going to go anywhere. But she didn't want to be alone and she was being selfish, and that she wants to make it up to them. Because she knew there was obviously a connection between them, but that she selfishly stole that from them in their youth, and she wants to make it up for him. And I wanted to know if that came from the book. And the way she's going to make it up for him is to give them. She found Madam's address, and so that maybe they can get a deferral by going to the gallery, because Madam runs the gallery. They go to the gallery, maybe they can get a deferral and have some more time together, basically. So I want to know if that came from the book.
Yeah, all of that does come from the book. She does apologize, and she gives them Madame's address.
Yeah.
So they can try to get that deferral.
Yeah. So then they go to try to get their deferral. Tommy has been working on his art in the intervening years and practicing to become better and better, so that maybe they can get their deferral. And they get to they get to her house, and she invites them in when she realizes why they're there. And Tommy like shows her all of his art and stuff, and she like looks at it and blah, blah, blah. And then Miss Emily rolls in, or Miss Emily, or Lady Emily, Miss Emily rolls in a wheelchair, and basically explains that there are no deferrals. That's not a thing. The art wasn't for that. It was literally. And what she says was, we used the art to prove that the clones at Hailsham were all but human. Basically saying, like, we need to treat these clones humanely because they are human. Whereas the system, apart from that, didn't care, just saw them as meat, essentially. And this is the quote unquote twist that I thought was really fascinating, where we kind of reframe Miss Emily and Madame from kind of villains in the story earlier on, where they seem to be antagonists who are, ruling with an iron. We don't really see anything cruel by them, but they're the power, and they're the people in power at this school, which we know as outside viewers is like this horrifying meat farm for children, basically. And so initially we view them very negatively, but in this moment it is revealed that they were actually fighting in their own way, kind of struggling against this system to try to give these kids at least something resembling a real happy life or whatever. And that this art was their way of trying to prove to the quote unquote powers that be that the clones were human. But the line that really broke my heart, that I want to know if it was in the book, it was she says, we used the art to prove that the clones at Hailsham were all but human. We were providing an answer to a question that no one was asking, which is just, I had to know if that line is from the book, because holy shit, that's an incredible line. Like, we were providing an answer to a question that no one was asking. It just got it. I was like, holy shit. And I wanted to know if that came from the book.
So I couldn't find these specific lines in the book when I went back and like skimmed through and was like looking through that scene. If you've got an ebook copy, I was not able to get a hold of one this time. See if that's in there. I couldn't find it anywhere. The explanation of what they were doing is the same, but I could not find that specific line.
That specific line, it lays bare so much of, because it rang so true about so many things in the real world to me. We're providing an answer to a question that no one was asking. It's like, we're over here trying to be like, look, you should care about these people. Look, I can prove to you, look, no, actually they do have souls. And the point is like, they literally, nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. And I just, the way it's such a succinct line to put such a button on that point in such a just devastating, it hit me like 1,000 bricks. I was like, oh God, brilliant. Anyways, a couple more questions here. So now they have found out that the deferrals aren't a thing. They're their last kind of ditch effort at of hope at maybe being able to spend more time together and that sort of thing are dashed, and they're driving home. At this point, Ruth is already dead. She has died on the operating table during one of her donations. It's just Tommy and Kathy, and they're driving home, and Tommy is like, "Hey, I need you to pull over." And he gets out of the car and he walks out and he just starts screaming, which is kind of calls back to his childhood, where we saw him kind of have this big outburst. One of the first times we kind of met him, or the kids were picking on him and he didn't really know how to handle his emotions, so he just
starts
screams.
like screaming and flailing.
Yeah. And I wanted to know if that scene came from the book, and if it echoes and kind of mirrors that, if it's that similar sort of reversion to his adolescence, to his coping mechanisms as a child, when he doesn't really know how to handle the cruelty of the world.
Yeah. This is all spot on to the book. And I would say that it is a callback to his earlier life. One small difference in this scene is that in the book, he walks completely out of Kathy's sight, like off into a field. I was genuinely very concerned in the book that he was going to commit suicide.
Yeah.
But that is not what happened.
Yeah. And then my last question for was that in the book is specifically moving on in the story. Right after that, we're in the film. We are now back to where the film started, which is Kathy watching Tommy go under for his fourth donation. And we find out that he dies during or right shortly thereafter. And we join Kathy. She's standing in a field kind of watching the sunset. And she says that her donations are about to start. And I wanted to know if she gives this big monologue, and it got me good. And this is, I think, the main reason it reminded me of Arrival. It reminded me of Amy Adams' kind of big monologue at the end of Arrival that always gets me. And it's a similar message to some extent. Like there's a similar, and I'll get to it in a second, but I just want to read it real quick. And I want to know if this came from the book. It's been 2 weeks since I lost him. I've been given my notice now. My first donation is in a month's time. I come here and imagine that this is the spot where everything I've lost since my childhood has washed out. I tell myself if that were true, and I waited long enough, that a tiny figure would appear on the horizon across the field and gradually get larger until I'd see it was Tommy. He'd wave and maybe call. I don't let the fantasy go beyond that. I can't let it. I remind myself I was lucky to have had any time with him at all. What I'm not sure about is if our lives have been so different from the lives of the people we save. We all complete. Maybe none of us really understand what we've lived through or feel we've had enough time. So does that come from the book is my first question. That monologue.
A lot of it is from the book, but not every single word.
Okay.
Like it's not a word for word.
Not word for word.
But a lot of that is from the last few lines of the book. Yeah.
Can you see if this specifically, because you have the book right there, the ones that I'm most interested is what I'm not sure about is if our the ones I used for the intro quote, because that's the part that stuck with me most. No, really? Okay. Interesting. All right, Alex Garland. Jesus. Assuming that was him. Yeah. So the thing that really struck to me about that particular thing, obviously it actually doesn't, now that you say that, it actually doesn't surprise me that it doesn't come from the book, because it's a little bit, it definitely is maybe a little more on the nose summary of the point than maybe the book would want to do. It's definitely puts more of a button on everything.
Yeah.
It kind of rounds out the message in a more succinct, obvious way than maybe some of the other elements of the film has done up until this point. So point being that it kind of reminds me of Arrival in the sense that at Arrival, the big spoilers for Arrival, the big monologue she gives at the end is that because she now can quote unquote see the future. She sees time non-linearly. And she knows that her daughter that she has with Jeremy Renner gets some sort of disease or whatever and dies kind of young or whatever. But she still makes the choice, quote unquote, makes the choice. It's confusing because it's non-linear time stuff, but quote unquote kind of makes the choice to still to have the child and have that time and the joy and experience the happiness and not basically let the sadness of the situation outweigh the joy that is there. And it's a similar kind of sentiment here of despite the fact that we live these weird, shortened, horrible lives, full of pain and again cruelty, that there is joy to be had, and then like the time she had with Andrew Garfield and all that sort of stuff. Tommy is his name. It just gave me a similar vibe. I will say it's interesting because it feels like Arrival's like the happier version
Yeah.
of this.
Yeah.
like this one's a little more, even more melancholy, which the Arrival one's fairly melancholy, but this one's even a little more melancholy than the Arrival one. But yeah, I thought it just reminded me of that in a way, and I thought it was similarly just very effective, and it kind of boils down the whole point of the story of that. It's a microcosm. Their story is our story, is all of our story, despite the fact that it's
Not.
yeah. And I think because it's interesting, I was thinking there is a way to kind of read that in a way that feels, I think you could cynically read that final scene. You could read that final monologue almost as like an apologia, for this terrible system,
Mm-hmm.
where she's like you could almost read that in a cynical way to be like apologia for like terrible systems or like bad things that happen. Is like, well, but like we all like
But,
all of our
like,
lives are
yeah.
kind of like,
I mean, yeah.
but I don't, that's not the point. And I don't read it that way, but I think I think if you read it kind of cynically, you could read it that way of like, of her saying like, oh, you know, what's to say that what was it? What I'm not sure about is if our lives have been so different from the lives of the people we save, we all complete. And you're like, well, because like obviously very clearly it is very different, and the
Yes.
system is terrible and awful. But I don't think that the story doesn't think that. I think the story agrees that this is all terrible.
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's fair. I just, and because I've actually heard similar kind of criticisms of Arrival in that way, that it does a similar thing at the end with like the kind of there's like a cynical way to read the end of Arrival of like her kind of making a very selfish choice to like have her daughter, despite
Like knowing that
this
she's
awful, like, and I agree that that's not nothing to that, but it's also, I don't know, like it's not the way I interpret it, and it's not the way it's not how the message I get out of it. And again, in Arrival, it's particularly complicated because I don't know if she even necessarily could not make that, like, because again, the weird, like, non-linear
Right.
time, like, I don't know if it's like a choice necessarily she could make. It's complicated. This one's less complicated because there's not like time travel or quote unquote time travel to like muddy things. But it is, yeah, it's interesting. I like it. I'd be interested to see if there are other people who don't vibe with it, if the sort of the criticism, if other people do have criticisms along the lines of it feeling dismissive of the cruelty and stuff, and like sort of apologizing for that in a way where it's like, oh, but actually we all just get to enjoy our life, like we're all like, you know what I mean? Like,
I
don't know.
don't think that it's dismissive of the cruelty or apologizing for it. For me, the like dark, cynical aspect of it lies in the fact that we have this character who maybe possibly does not fully realize
Yeah.
what has been done to her, what has
Yes.
been taken from her.
Yeah, no, I guess yes, I agree. There is a darkness to that in the sense that she doesn't realize, like when she says like, you know, maybe our lives, or I'm not so sure if our lives have been so different from the lives of the people we save. I think I get what you're saying, that yes, she doesn't realize that it is, like maybe she doesn't like fully realize how
Yeah.
different their lives have been and how awful it is. But I think there's, from looking at it from the outside looking in, I think that's a valid interpretation or reading of it. But from the inside looking out, I think it's very much an empowering message of, regardless of, which again, I think can be a little patronizing, and I get that, but that regardless of the situation, we all fucking die. And yes, maybe some of us live to be 100, some of us live to be 50, whatever. But it's really a call to, which is maybe twee or whatever, but it is truly a call to appreciate the people in your life and the time you have with them, regardless of how much time that is, which is again the same message that Arrival is making. Ultimately, I think, which works for me because it it's that thing of like, it isn't the amount of time is less important than the time itself and what you do with it. And I think I understand the criticism of that, to be like, yeah, that's easy to say
Yeah.
if you have lots of time, and less easy to say if you're a fucking kid living in Gaza right now. It's a very different situation. Like, I understand that, and it's not to be dismissive of that. It is I don't know. It's tough. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so effective, is it isn't just like an easy, like, yeah, little like feel good thing. Like, there is that bittersweet. Is there something specifically you started?
No.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you had a thought of a line or something you wanted to read, but
No.
you were just glancing through. Okay. Very fascinated to get other people's opinions on this and see how they feel about it. Cause again, it worked for me, but I understand.
Yeah, I was just looking at the end of the book again, because I do think that line, I don't know, I that's not necessarily the message that I got from the end of the book
Which one? What message?
about like appreciating what you have and
like
the time that you
have.
have. I don't think it's not there, and I do think that the book and the movie are similar in that they're both like exploring similar themes, and like these themes about like your life and like what you do with your life, but like on a much sped up timeline.
Right.
But that wasn't necessarily the read that I got from the end of the book, and I feel like, to me, the addition of those lines is pulling a lot of weight.
Yes. And that's what I said. I agree. And no, that is the thing where I can definitely see that. And I do think those lines are really trying to like kind of tie this up a little neater maybe than the book does.
Because the book, to me, has, not that the end of the movie isn't melancholy.
Oh, no, it definitely is.
But the book, I think, is more so to me. Like, when I finished reading that book the other night.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I came into the kitchen.
Yeah.
And you said to me, how was it?
Yeah.
And I said, what did I say?
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
No, well, I do, but because I remember, and I said, I don't remember the exact words you said, I guess is my point.
I know, you were like, how was it?
Yeah.
And I said, upsetting.
Yes, okay.
I was upsetty spaghetti when I finished this book.
Yeah, you said upsetting, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think the movie still captures most of that, because you do feel that for her. Like, you still, even in that moment with that line, you still feel like, but you don't know, like you were robbed of a real life. Like, but there's still nothing there. And there's something, I don't know, there's still something in that sentiment that I think is valuable, even if it is hard to fully embrace, because it definitely can feel maybe a little sort of dismissive of suffering. Like, it can feel a little like, always look on the bright side of life, kind of like it can feel a little patronizing.
Yeah.
That like point of like, oh, but it's all like, sure, I only lived to be 30 and then I had my organs forcibly removed from my body, but like, I did love Andrew Garfield for a while. Like, I get that. I don't know. It's tough. I guess, again, I think that's why.
I don't know. And I'm interested to hear how other people feel about it, because I also have my suspicions that like my particular ish and who I am as a person is coloring this, because I do like, I find this type of story like particularly upsetting. I don't usually read dystopia like this because I do find it upsetting. And I have a very keen sense of justice, and I don't know if maybe I'm like over focused on that aspect of the story. So I'm interested to hear what other people think.
Yeah. And again, I think that's why it's so effective as a story, is that it allows for all of that. Like, it all of those readings, all of those kind of interpretations are there to be had. And it is, I don't think the movie wants you to necessarily land in any one place. Like, I don't think the movie is like necessarily thinks you need to come away thinking like, like with a kind of like uplifting.
Yeah. Also, for the record, I'm not saying that you don't have a keen sense of justice.
No.
I just have an overdeveloped one.
Yeah, I get what you're saying for sure. All right. Those are all my questions for Was That in the Book? I got one little question, kind of, for Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So this isn't really so much a Lost adaptation. I just wanted to, it kind of is. It made the most sense to put it here to me. Is that I wanted to know if the book. So the film does this really interesting thing where it gives you very small pieces of the world and kind of slowly allows you to puzzle things together. Where you like it, the movie is not interested. I found it really fascinating how uninterested the film was in explaining everything. It gives you just enough of the world and what's going on to, like I said, slowly piece things together. Because you're clearly just viewing, you're getting a slice of this world through the eyes, very specifically of Kathy, but also Tommy and Ruth. I think it works beautifully. I could see how some audience, like some people watching it, might struggle with that and find it like kind of annoying that we don't know enough about like how this world works. But I think it gives you enough for the context of the story, and I also just found it fascinating, kind of slowly feeling like chunks of the world fall into place in my brain as we watch the movie, and like, oh, okay, oh, I see that's interesting. And I wanted to know if the book similarly doled out the world building and the backstory of the world as sort of meticulously, and if it left it as vague, because it wouldn't surprise me to know that the book maybe went into more depth and you get a little bit more information about the world and how it works than the movie gives you.
I mean, there's definitely more information in the book just by nature of it being an almost 300-page book versus an hour and 45-minute movie.
Yeah.
But it is meted out very similarly to what the movie does. And I do think Ishiguro does this quite masterfully in the book. It's parceled out in a way that gives you just enough until things start to click into place.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me too, because I think it's something that's really difficult to do when you're world building, is to be able to approach it through the perspective of a character who's not new to that world in some way, because often it really helps when you're world building to have a character who's new, right? So you have an excuse to be explaining things. Like Harry Potter, classic example of this, right? Harry's new to the wizarding world,
Right.
so we have this excuse to like, oh,
Explain
what's
things,
this?
yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
How does this work?
Yeah.
But we don't have that here.
No.
Right? Kathy is
All of them, yeah.
our perspective character, and she has lived her entire life in this
She
world.
knows nothing else.
She knows nothing else, but also like, why would she be explaining it
Yeah, there's nothing to question. There's
to
nothing
herself?
Yeah.
There's no reason for that. But I think it is handled really, really well in a way that still works.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the movie does a great job with it. And that's why, like I said, I put it in Lost in Adaptation, but it's kind of like the opposite in the sense that, like, I did not find myself wanting or needing more in the film. Like, because often Lost in Adaptation, I'm like, well, what is, you know, the question is like, okay, maybe the book has more background information about, like, why the world's this way or why, or whatever.
It really does not.
Yeah, well, and in this instance, I didn't care. Like, I didn't want to know. I didn't even want to know, because I think I felt constantly like I had enough of what I needed to know, and I also loved not knowing. Like, I loved not only. I loved, again, only seeing the world kind of through the eyes of our main characters, and only being able to interpret it the way they did, kind of. Again, you get enough of a picture by the end of the film that you basically know what's going on roughly. And it also helps that it's not that different of a world. Like, it's
Yes. Yeah. It looks like our world.
It's basically our world,
just with some big changes.
with forced organ donors.
Yes.
Like, that's the main.
Yeah.
Like it's not that outlandish. Like, I can understand what's going on here. And I don't need, it's not like Divergent where I'm like, wait, okay, but how is this going on? Like, you don't like, there's not those big leaps.
Yeah,
in, like,
you're not sitting there going, but why?
Yeah, there's not that at all. It all kind of just tracks. And again, I like you said, and like we were just talking about, a big part of that is that it's very similar to our world,
Yeah.
and it doesn't seem, it's very close. It's just like the one conceit is,
there's clones
that we
forced
farm organs from.
Donation.
Which is a thing people have discussed. I've heard, that's not a thing that is that outlandish already anyways. Like people have just, obviously we already are working on like growing organs and stuff like that. And the idea, and we can clone people, and the idea of like cloning, I think it's fairly outlandish that we would ever get to a point where we would do something like this, but it's not impossible. And so it doesn't need a lot of explanation. And so I think it works in that way. And maybe that makes it easier in the sense that it makes it a little easier where you can leave things a little more kind of nebulous and vague and just give little pieces and stuff without making your audience kind of like question or without that resulting in your audience like questioning everything and feeling kind of lost. But that being said, I just thought it was brilliantly executed. And again, I don't know how much of that was even intentional or really just, honestly, it sounds like they're mostly just kind of following the blueprint that the book gave. But it's also a thing that I think Alex Garland is just very good at, looking at the rest of his movies, Ex Machina, Dread, Sunshine, all of those, these sci-fi stories that exist in this universe. Very rarely in those stories am I ever like, this doesn't really track, like I'm trying to figure out like why the world is the way it is or however, whatever his magic secret sauce is for world building and like explaining things, he's very good at it. At least for me, maybe other people it doesn't work.
I was a little confused watching Annihilation.
See, I even disagree. Yeah. Well, now, to be fair, I read Annihilation, which I'm sure helped in that regard. That may have been one where it's a little bit.
But like his other stuff that I've seen, I did not have, and I wasn't even like super confused in Annihilation.
Yeah.
I was just mostly at the end. I was a little lost.
Yeah. And that's another reason, again, that I mentioned in the prequel, but the Civil War movie he's working on that everybody's memeing on the internet. That's another reason that I'm very, I don't know if lenient's the right word, where I'm giving him a big benefit of the doubt on that because he's so good at that world building and at setting up sci-fi and dystopian or whatever universes that just kind of work. At least to me, again, I think, and to a lot of audiences, obviously, the movies that we're discussing here are all very popular, critically acclaimed movies for the most part. So I think it works for most people. But again, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt there because it's just so good at it, and it's just it's so effortless, seemingly. Like it doesn't even seem like it's trying; it just kind of happens.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, fuck you. It shouldn't be that easy. Maybe it's not easy, but it seems like he does it so effortlessly. Anyways, all right, those are all my questions. It's time now to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
So there's a scene in the movie that we see really, really quickly where Madam is coming into the school and she like scrunches herself in really tight to avoid touching any of the girls. And I was glad that the movie included that in some form. I thought it hit so much harder in the book. So in the book, what happens is that they're discussing Madam and they're kind of discussing like, what's her deal?
Yeah.
Because she's this mysterious person that just shows up every now and then, and she takes their artwork, and she doesn't really interact with any of them. And Ruth posits this, I think it's Ruth, posits this theory that Madam is scared of them. And they don't really understand why, but she's like, no, she's scared of us.
Yeah.
So they concoct this experiment that the next time Madam shows up, they're going to come like walk towards her as she's walking into the building and like go like kind of force her into close proximity with them. And before they do this, they're kind of all like talking and joking with each other, and it's like this fun little game that they've come up with, like kids do.
Right.
And then they do it, And the way that she reacts to them, Kathy describes as like the way that somebody reacts to seeing a spider
Yeah.
coming towards them, just like horrified and disgusted.
Yeah.
So they do it and she reacts like that, and then afterwards it's like all of the air is let out of the balloon with these girls. Like they're just so deflated.
Yeah.
And it's so upsetting to have their hypothesis confirmed that like, oh yeah, she actually is
Yeah.
like scared of us, disgusted by us, whatever.
But that's not actually the case. So what is
It
what
is the case.
Oh,
though.
is it?
Yeah, because there's a like a prejudice. I don't know if prejudice is even the right word. With the clones in this, and she cares about them. Like she cares about them, and she believes in this mission
Right.
that her and
But
Miss
she's
Emily
still-
are on.
yeah.
But she's still like subject to that the societal prejudice.
Yeah. No,
with
that
the
makes
clones.
that makes sense, and it reflects, I think, some very real world kind of experiences of that idea of, you know, there's tons of people out there who, you know, really genuinely like want to help people, want to donate money to blah blah blah, but like being around the people they would actually be helping
Yeah.
is not something they're interested in
Yeah.
because it's, you know, they find them, you know, scary or repulsive or whatever. Like I think that's a very real thing. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for example, like it's like that's the whole freaking like you know, NIMBYism thing, or like the you know, there's you know, say what you will about it's a complicated thing, but like the whole thing in like California and stuff, and like bigger cities in California and stuff, where like with unhoused problems and stuff like that. It's like, you know, there's a lot of liberals in California talk a big game about, and I'm using liberals here generally, whatever. Talk, you know, obviously, and genuinely do want to like help unhoused people,
Yeah.
and genuinely do want to like eliminate, you know, poverty and do these things to help people who are unhoused and all that sort of stuff. But also do not want to see them, do not want to be around them, do not want, you know, like very much like.
For anyone who doesn't know, NIMBY is
Yes.
an acronym that stands for Not in My Backyard.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting juxtaposition, because I don't think either one of, I don't think the desire to help the people is like ungenuine.
Yeah.
It's and so it's an interesting, like, it seems like the book is kind of dealing with a similar idea there of like, yeah, it's like I think the desire to help and do something for these people is genuine, but it's also kind of this, there's this almost this dissonance between like what they want to do versus their like kind of natural reaction or just reactions,
and or like this ingrained thing that they've been taught.
Yeah.
There's a quick scene in the movie after the sale when Tommy gets Kathy the tape, where she kisses him on the cheek. I wasn't super sure how I felt about that. I get the movie's choice to include it, but I thought that being privy to Kathy's inner monologue and like watching her feelings for Tommy develop through that was more subtle and interesting than like showing it visually by having her kiss him on the cheek.
Yeah.
I also feel like maybe we didn't even need that in the movie, because I already thought it was kind of obvious without it. But
yeah, I would agree.
I guess it's neither here nor there, really. But
yeah.
So we see in the movie Kathy listening to the song and like kind of like clutching like a pillow or a blanket and like swaying. In the book, she's doing that. She's listening to it, and she's like dancing around the room, and she stops because she notices that Madam is standing in the doorway and like watching her and crying, and she can't figure out what was going on there for a really long time. And then of course at the end of the book, when we find out like what they were trying to do, that makes perfect sense. I was a little surprised that the movie cut that.
Yeah, that would have been a really impactful scene, I feel like.
One of the big things that I missed in the movie was the friendship politics between Kathy and Ruth while they're at Hailsham, particularly. It was absolutely fascinating to me how much Ishiguro managed to get completely correct about how complex female friendships can be during that part of your life.
Yeah.
Because if I had read this book and I didn't know it was written by a man, I might have guessed it was written by a woman. Because there were parts of that that were so spot on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say that felt like maybe the movie's biggest stumble to me. Because I really loved the movie overall. I don't think it's like a perfect film or anything. Not that I thought it was very good, but not like a masterpiece. I just thought it was like a really well made film. But I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me in terms of like narrative and stuff was that I don't think we got quite enough of the early relationship dynamics, specifically between Kathy and Ruth, but really between all of them, but really specifically between Kathy and Ruth. To really help the later stuff land. I think it still works. Like it's not like it doesn't work. It obviously does because I really liked it. But I think the last, the end of the movie, the second and third act of the movie would have hit way harder if the first act had maybe been another 10 minutes longer. So the movie's split into like roughly 3 acts, kind of. And the first act is like their childhood. The second act is like their teenage years. And the third act is like, quote unquote, their adulthood or whatever, kind of. And I think if there had been like, the movie's only an hour and 45 minutes long. I think if it had been 2 hours and we had added just a handful of more scenes, particularly in the first and second act, but mainly the first and a little bit in the second, to really round out some of their, just a few more scenes between Kathy and Ruth and Tommy and Kathy or whatever. I just think it really would have made the final act land even harder.
Yeah, I agree. The book spends much more time at Hailsham than the movie does, which is interesting.
But yeah, because it's funny because I added my note here to your note because that was the one of my main, like I had that exact same thought upon watching the movie when we finished. I was like, man, I feel like they needed a little bit more time, and it was interesting to see you because we didn't discuss this, but you wrote the exact thing in your Better in the Book here that I felt would have improved the movie quite a bit. And so, yeah, I actually would be really interested to see if there's a director's cut of this movie out there and what that looks like. If there is like a 2-hour version or, that includes some of those early scenes or, includes some more of that stuff in the early part of the film. But
so when they get to the cottages, in the movie, we see Kathy confront Ruth about, she squeezes Tommy's shoulders.
Yes.
And Kathy's like, well, you're just copying something you saw on TV, and that's not really the way that people act. And this is something that comes from the book, the idea that, like, while they're at the cottages, some of them are, like, copying behavior that they see on TV shows. I thought the reveal of that was more interesting in the book.
I was a little confused initially when it happened in the film. I was like, wait, what are we oh, okay. And so I would agree that I don't think it worked perfectly.
Yeah, I don't think it, like, super landed in the movie, because what happens in the book is that Kathy sees, it's like a behavior that she sees Ruth doing that Ruth copied from Rodney and Chrissy, which is like, it's not the squeezing the shoulder thing. It's like a light, like slap to the arm for your significant other. Like, you know what I'm talking about? Like an OU.
Yeah, like a playful.
Yeah, like a playful little like whap to the arm. And she like cannot figure out why they're all doing this.
Yeah.
And then one night she's watching TV by herself and she sees somebody do it in the episode of TV that she's watching, and it like clicks into place that they're trying to like mimic behaviors that they see on TV.
It's possible I missed it in the movie, but I think this is a similar criticism to the last one where I think because from my memory in the movie, this is all set up and paid off within like the same scene.
Yeah.
Like where they watch the thing on TV and then she sees them do it and confronts her about it. Where what would have worked better is if we had seen them do it, then, which may happen and I may have just missed it. It's possible.
I don't think it did.
But if we had seen them do the action, then she sees the TV, has the realization, then sees them do it again, then confronts them.
I agree.
And so again, I think that's just another one of those things where if we had just had a little bit more time, because I was not disappointed the movie was an hour 45, and I think it moves really well, but I think it could have been 2 hours.
Yeah, it could have been 2 hours, and I think that would have improved some areas a bit.
Yeah, but it was, to be fair, it's only a marginal increase in like, because it's already good. Like I don't think we're going from like a 6 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. I think we're going from like a 7, an 8 to like an 8.5 or whatever. Like a very marginal increase, but I think it could have definitely helped to have a little bit more of that.
There's a recurring motif in the book that the movie excises, which is that while they're at Hailsham, the kids have this like inside joke about I know I'm gonna mispronounce this because I never get the British places right. Norfolk,
I think it is Norfolk, but
Norfolk.
I don't know. That's a tough one because it's funny because I was like Norfolk, and then you said it, and I was like, that can't be right. Because that was how I was saying.
I always get them wrong.
No. It was so funny though because the way you said it was how I was saying it in my head. I was like, it's probably Norfolk, and then you said it. I'm like, no, that can't be right. That sounds so wrong. So I don't know.
Whatever it is,
because like Suffolk.
Yeah,
so
Suffolk. Norfolk.
I don't know.
But they have this joke about that area being a place where all the things that they lose when they're kids ends up, which then ends up like tying back in at the end when she goes out, when she's standing by the fence with all of the garbage. She's at the place where all of her lost things go, and that's where she is in the book. She drives out there to think about all of the things that she's lost, which, and I think it still works in the movie. Like, it's fine.
You don't need that setup. I thought it worked fine as it is, but
I did think it was an interesting, like, kind of recurring.
Yeah.
motif.
No, I think it would have been good to see it again. Yeah. Like I said, as the movie is, it works great. And we have a note about this later. We'll talk about it. I think because the visual imagery is so strong in that scene that it doesn't need to be previously established. But I think it could have been even stronger maybe if we had, depending on how it was done.
There's a scene when they're there, when they're looking for Ruth's Possible, where Kathy and Tommy actually get to like go around by themselves, and they go to like some secondhand shops. They're looking for her tape, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But I thought that was nice. Again, I don't think that the movie needs it necessarily, but I thought it was nice that they had that like time together. And I thought it worked well in the book.
Yeah.
Wasn't sure how I felt about the scene where Ruth comes into Kathy's bedroom, the horror movie scene.
Oh, yeah.
So Ruth, I thought got a little shortchanged by the movie, maybe more so than the other two main characters. She was a much bigger bitch throughout the book.
She's obnoxious in the movie.
She's pretty obnoxious in the movie. I detested her for most of the book. She reminded me of every frenemy I've ever had. So the movie ended up feeling like a little bit more of a heel turn to me, and it didn't quite land for me.
That's fair. I will say this: obviously I can't compare it to the book. It worked for me. I felt I didn't detest her for most of the book or the film, but that I will say that scene where she comes into her bedroom in like the horror movie scene and like is like kind of taunting her and like being shitty did not feel out of character to me and felt right in line with kind of the weird frenemy relationship that they have. So like to me, I thought it worked in the film, and I am not comparing it to the book, so I don't know. But it did not feel out of line. To me, it did not feel like a kind of like a sudden heel turn. To me, it just felt like a progression of their weird frenemy dynamic. So again, for me, it landed. So I think maybe if you have not read the book, it works maybe a little bit better because I'm just not comparing it to the book. But like I said, I also it's very different, obviously. But I also thought she was pretty awful for most of the movie.
Pretty she's just a bitch.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think the movie softens her a little bit. It sounds like
it does soften her.
I think it softens her a little bit, but I don't think it softens her a lot because I think it's still there. Yeah. Like I said, it was the vibe I got from her character.
It was really interesting to read because like reading it, as a 34-year-old, I was like, come on, Kathy, why are you friends with her?
Yes.
But
that's how I felt watching the movie. I was like, why are you friends with her?
But then like thinking back, I'm like, I had those friends.
Yeah. Yep.
Not anymore. Because I'm an adult. They do go on a trip to see a beached boat in the book, but in the book, it came much further inland than what we see in the movie. It's in this like marshy area that's in the middle of like not a forest, but like kind of a lightly wooded area, which to me sounds far more haunting.
I will argue only in this so far in this regard. I think the imagery and the symbolism of it being right there on the beach is maybe a little more like cruel. Because obviously, like I think there's a lot of things you can get out of that scene, but I think one of the things that really stuck me about the scene is that it's the boat is this kind of symbolism of freedom, of
Hmm.
the ability, like were they to have a working boat, they could sail away
Mm.
and go, seek greener pastures, like sail into the sunset. Maybe they find, the new
Maybe,
world,
yeah.
whatever.
Maybe if they go to a country that's not growing clones.
Whatever. Yeah, that's what I mean. And so I think the symbolism of having it be right there where you can see the ocean. It's
Mhm.
so close, but this boat is just this rusted old, like it's obviously not a functioning. This is like this old beat up rusted boat, but being so close to quote unquote the potential escape, like the sailing to the Grey Havens or whatever. like I think there's like a haunting. I could see both. I'm just saying that just coming at it from the movie side, I found that visual very striking in the movie, of that, like that false hope ish kind of thing, of having it right there on the beach, ocean stretched out behind them, this stark, like the framing of it, that we get that big wide shot where Tommy's on the boat and the boat's kind of there on the shore, and it's just like the ocean stretched out before them, the potential, the wasted potential. I don't know. I think you could have done a similar, and you could have evoked a lot of interesting other stuff with it being in a location more like the book. I just want to say that I think the movie's version works really well too in its own way.
That's fair. And I do like that interpretation. I will counter that by saying I was really looking forward to seeing what the book described.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying it's better. That's just what I got from that scene. And I thought it worked really well, having it be right there on the beach like that.
My final note here is about the scene where they're talking with Madame and Miss Emily. And I thought the scene in the movie was really effective. Thought it worked really well. But I did like that it's just a little more fleshed out in the book, as stuff usually is. There's just a little more to it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go ahead and find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
First thing, like the first big, like kind of big difference that I noticed was the tracking bracelets that they all wear, where they have to like beep in when they're coming and going.
Yeah, they basically
there.
like keeping track of
Yeah,
their
keeping
movements, essentially.
Keeping tabs on them.
Yeah.
That was, if that was mentioned in the book, I never caught it. But I thought that was a good world building detail that also just made perfect sense.
Yeah.
Like, of course they're tracking.
Yeah, of course they want to know where,
Yeah.
when you're leaving and going and coming and going. Yeah.
There was a quick shot close to the beginning of the movie, I think in like the girls' dorm at Hailsham, where we zoom in on a close up of all these like creepy old dolls.
I missed that.
It was a really quick shot, but I really liked it. I thought it worked well thematically because they are kind of like dolls.
Yeah, you mean the kids?
Yeah, the kids.
Yeah.
I liked the quick shot also of all of the kids like filing through and picking up, like they all go through and pick up like a little bottle of milk and a little cup with like vitamins or something in it. Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was a good shot. You don't see their faces; they're kind of just faceless, like moving through an assembly line.
Yeah, and everything is all the milk bottles and everything are lined up like very neatly.
Yeah, like I said, it's an assembly line. It's a meat factory.
Yeah,
yeah.
I kind of liked Tommy being the one to get Kathy the tape at the sale. That is not the case in the book. She finds it on her own. And they cut out a whole plot line where she gets the tape and then she loses that original tape. doesn't know what happened to it. And then later on, when they're out looking for Ruth's possible, and there's that scene that I mentioned earlier when they go in like secondhand shops, and he's helping her find a replacement for the tape.
Yeah.
So I thought that change made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I think it works fine. We kind of talked about the TV show at the cottages earlier, but I thought there was a nice little subtle moment in there with Ruth, like all of the other kids would laugh at something that happened, and she would laugh like slightly late, and then kind of like glance back at them.
Yeah.
Just to show like how much, like she really wants to be like them. She really wants to fit in.
Yeah.
The scene, jumping ahead here a lot, the scene where Kathy is now working as a carer, and she's at a hospital or whatever. She's at a hospital, and she finds Ruth. She like realizes that Ruth is at that hospital she sees her like information up on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And I liked that scene a lot better than how she finds out about Ruth in the book. What happens in the book is that she runs into this other former classmate of hers who's also working as a carer, and this classmate is not doing so hot with that job and kind of like emotionally dumps on her. And then she tells her that like, oh, Ruth is at this center. You should apply to be her carer.
Yeah.
You got to apply to be her carer. You have to. But I liked the more like kind of subtle moment where she sees her on the computer screen.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty dark. And then like as she's talking to the nurse, and the nurse is like, oh, I think she wants to complete.
Yeah.
With this picture of Ruth in the background, just like staring
looking like a skeleton.
hollowly from the computer screen with like no life at all in her eyes. I thought it was very effective. A little moment of Tommy being like awkward and like naively hopeful, but also maybe trying to convince himself.
Right. Yeah.
He's talking about this guy he knows, and he's like, he just came through his third donation and he's totally all right.
Yeah.
And then like smiles really
like,
big. He's just like, totally, everything's fine. This is fine. Everything's fine.
Exactly. It's the this is fine meme with the dog in the fire. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier the thing with Kathy and her desire for sex, where she talks about in the movie how she gets these moments of like a tremendous urge to have sex, and it's like overwhelming.
Yeah.
I thought the movie did a better job of kind of explaining why she was bothered by that. Because she talks about how like she's worried that it means she was modeled on like a porn star maybe, or somebody like quote unquote less than desirable, which is another thing.
Which we find out that all of them supposedly, they say that they're all like...
Ruth says that at least that's Ruth's theory, is that they're modeled after people who were considered disposable by society, right? So this plot point is in the book. I thought the book's version of things got muddled because the book early on goes into like great lengths to explain that they actually do, and I didn't want to interrupt you while you were on a tear, but they actually do get a comprehensive sex education at Hailsham
in the book.
Yeah, like very thorough, and we see a brief moment of them explaining in the movie.
Oh, do they?
Like the teacher has like a skeleton up on the tabletop.
I must have missed
and
that
it's like demonstrating how you like lay down in missionary style.
Oh, okay.
It was like a blink and you'll miss it.
I
scene.
must have completely missed that.
But the book goes to great lengths to explain that they get this like very comprehensive sex education, and so then it didn't like quite make sense to me initially why Kathy would be so bothered by it. And it just kind of, I think the book just like stretched it on for too long.
Yeah.
So that by the time we get to the explanation, it just didn't all click together for me.
Yeah.
And so I thought the movie, by like kind of cutting some of that back, improved that particular plot point a little bit. The scene where Kathy and Tommy have sex for the first time, I thought was pretty sweet in the movie, where she just like takes off her dress or whatever and like lays down with him.
Yeah, it's very like
it's very
nothing.
brief. You don't see
There's
anything.
like literally, you wouldn't even call it a sex scene because they literally.
That's
I mean,
true.
it's
She
implied
literally-
that they have
it's
sex,
implied, but
it's not like Kathy or with Ruth and Tommy, we do actually see them quote unquote having sex. Like we see that it's like they lay down next to each other and kind of like kiss, and then it
cutscene
cuts it. Yeah.
But I thought it was very sweet. Whereas in the book, I thought it was a little bit awkward. 'Cause she says in the book, like, she says that she put her hand down and she calls it his stuff, which was it's another reason that I feel like the sex stuff in this book was a little bit muddled, because like I think the point was trying to show that she's still like kind of immature, and she's like referring to his penis as his stuff, right? But then also they're supposed to have gotten this really great comprehensive sex education, so I'm like, I don't know, man.
It's interesting, yeah.
My last note here is about the scene where Ruth dies.
Yes.
Because that was upsetting.
Yes.
She dies on the operating table.
Yeah.
And just like the stark contrast to everything you've ever seen in any other medical drama, where somebody's on the operating table and like the beeping starts.
Yeah. There's just no reaction.
Yeah, there's no reaction. There's no rush to resuscitate. They just leave her laying there like a slab of meat.
Well, yeah, which
is what she is.
Her heartbeat stops and they don't react.
Yeah.
They just finish doing removing whatever organ, and then they just unplug her and leave. And like it's like let the janitor clean that one out. You know, like they literally, that scene, and then that moment, and then the moment where at the end where we're seeing Tommy go under for his 4th donation, and there's the moment where they like give him the like the drugs to like put him under or whatever, and the moment his eyes shut and he goes out, they just like start manhandling him.
Yeah. And
it's they're both just so brutal. And now, to be fair, that is, from what I understand, not entirely untrue to real life, where they are not exactly precious with you while you're under anesthesia and they're like doing surgery stuff. But that being said, I think the implication we're definitely supposed to get out of that scene is that like as soon as he goes under, they like grab his neck and like wrench his head around and start like doing whatever they need to do in a very kind of cold and callous way. And it's very reminiscent, again, similar to the scene where Ruth does die. Very intentional and very effectively gets the point across, with zero dialogue, zero anything, zero, just showing us a handful of moments from this world, and you get everything you need to know about how this all works, and how the world sees these clones, these people. Yeah. All right, we got a handful of things in the movie. Nailed it.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We see a little scene close to the beginning of Ruth and Kathy playing horses. Very similar to what happens in the book. I think they're playing like pretend horses, like they're pretending to ride horses in the book, but pretty similar. The cigarette thing, from the beginning. Now the big difference is that in the book, they're just talking about cigarettes. There's not like, oh, we found some cigarette butts on the ground. But particularly the bit about like, it's super important that you guys keep yourselves healthy inside.
No smoking, no being.
Like that whole thing is straight from the book.
Yeah.
Miss Lucy telling Tommy that being creative isn't important. Straight from the book. Ruth's outburst about them being modeled from trash, as she says. Look in the gutter if you want to find who we're modeled after.
Yeah.
That whole thing. And then another particular line that when Ruth is talking later when she's being very cynical about the donation process, and she's talking about how after the 4th donation, there's still plenty more, and they just keep taking and taking until they switch you off.
Yeah.
Tommy's weird little animal drawings that he does. I thought the movie was gonna cut that because it had not come up yet.
Yeah.
When they were at the cottages, but then it does come up, and we get his little animal drawings.
Yep.
Miss Emily and Madame are a lesbian power couple.
Yeah, that was a fun surprise. I was like,
that
why
was
is she there?
That was a fun surprise in the book too. That was like, oh.
Yeah, she got wheeled out from. I was like, why was she in Madam's house? Wait, I guess that's what's going on.
Because they were roommates.
Yeah, they were roommates. Yeah.
And then the fence at the end with all of the trash stuck to it. Kathy imagining that if she waits long enough, Tommy will turn up there too.
Yeah, I actually almost asked about that because I thought that was just brilliant visual symbolism there at the end. I did wonder if that particular visual motif came from the book of the trash, like the barbed wire fence with the trash stuck to it. Because in particular, we get the close up of like 2 bits of like plastic.
Yeah.
What they should have done is they should have started playing Plastic Bag by Katy Perry. That would have been the perfect song to go out on. Do you ever feel? No, but like we get the close up of the two pieces of plastic kind of like blowing in the wind, stuck on the fence, and just that visual. I mean, it's not an original idea. Dust in the wind is literally but like that idea of like, you know, the very fleeting moments of life we get. Kind of they're these. The way I interpret that, at least, is that these bits of the plastic stuck on the fence are, you know, our lives. It's you're blown through carried through on the wind, similar to Forrest Gump, carried through, you know, blah blah blah, and very briefly you land and are stuck in this place, our life on Earth, caught in the fence for however long until boop, you know.
Yeah.
You get blown. Actually, I was actually expecting the plastic to like blow off the fence before the shot ended, and it didn't. I was actually glad it didn't because I would have felt a little too on the nose. But again, like that symbolism I thought was just, again, not super subtle, but not like crazy.
Yeah.
On the nose.
Yeah.
Just effective, well done. Kind of visual metaphor that I thought worked really well. So it's interesting to know it came from the book. All right, we got a handful of odds and ends before we get to the final verdict.
I thought this movie did a really good job casting baby Carey Mulligan.
Yes. I had the exact same note. I said, young Carey Mulligan is a dead ringer for Carey Mulligan.
Yeah, really, really great casting.
I honestly thought that the same for Keira Knightley. Young Keira Knightley looked very, not as much.
Not as good.
But still very
pretty good.
I will say the Andrew Garfield one, not as much. Didn't really look, wasn't as close. But it was so funny. I looked up that actress who played young Carey Mulligan. She made a whole career playing young other actresses.
Oh, yeah.
Like you go through her IMDb, it's just young this person, young this person, young this person. It's like, oh my God, I can't even remember who some of the other ones was. Charlize Theron was one. There was like a handful of she was in a handful of movies in this period from like 2009 to 2012 or 13, where she just played young versions of like famous movie stars, and I thought it was very funny.
Not a sustainable career, but
yeah. I blew my mind, and I don't know how I recognized it, but it was so funny. When they get to the cottages, we get this establishing shot of the cottages, and I was like, I know that set from somewhere. It's not a set, it's a real location, but I was like, I know that location. And then immediately I was like, that's the freaking farmhouse from Children of Men, where the fishes like bases or whatever that he takes. I can't remember any of their names, but where he takes the girl, the pregnant girl too. And it's funny because the farm, I'm pretty sure they just used that whole set in Children of Men, or that whole location, because I'm pretty sure the farm where she's reading the porno mags is the farm house where he sees the pregnant girl her pregnant,
like where she shows him that she's pregnant.
I think that's the same farmhouse. It looked the same to me, but in particular, or the same barn in particular, the farmhouse that has that big bay window.
Yeah, the big green window.
Very recognizable, specifically from Children of Men. But I looked it up, It is that. It's also in 28 Weeks Later, which actually has a Rumpelstiltskin in it.
Oh,
Because it was
does
funny.
it?
I was looking up photos from 28 Weeks Later of that location, and they're all photos of that. I can't remember the actor's name, but the guy who plays Rumpelstiltskin, like running around there. It's apparently called Stocker's Farm, and it's located in Rickmansworth, Hertfordshire, and just outside of London. But it's also been in Downton Abbey, Withnail and I, Bridget Jones' Edge of Reason, Peep Show, Midsummer Murders, and a bunch of other. Like, it's been in tons of stuff. It's just like a very popular filming location.
Good on them.
Yeah.
I really loved the wardrobe in the cottages section where they're all wearing like kind of distressed like sweaters and like slouchy things. It's just so cozy and slouchy, which is a great contrast to what's going on.
Yes, this is true. Very true. And it's so funny though that I mentioned it, or now I think about it. There's a shot where they're standing at the cottages. I'm pretty sure they're standing at like a window, and it's like it's like in the kitchen or something, and it might even be the big bay window. I'm not sure. They're standing at some window, and the light was coming through. And this is before we saw the outside, I think. And I was like, man, this reminds me of Children of Men, like the cinematography, like the lighting and stuff. And then we see it. I was like, oh my god, it's literally the same thing. Like, it was just very funny. But you mentioned the horror movie scene, but that reveal, it got me so good. I think you were looking down, taking a note when it happened. But the shot where Kathy is sitting in bed listening to her tape, like on loud because they're having sex or whatever. And then the camera cuts around and Ruth is just silhouetted in the doorway, like leering, like literally like the Ring Girl or something. Like her hair is like lank hanging down. It's just horrifying. And then the way that whole scene plays out is very horror movie. And it made me think of, because I remembered from the prequel, we talked about some review where somebody was like, it's an effective horror because it doesn't realize it's a horror. And I was like, I think this movie knows it's a horror movie in some ways. But I think you were correct.
Yeah, I think the review you're thinking of, was actually a book review.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, and the reviewer had said that the book was a perfect horror novel because the characters don't realize.
Which kind of goes back to our
novel.
previous discussion about the final monologue and everything. And about, And that is correct. But I was like, I think the movie definitely knows, because that is shot exactly like a horror. Like, that is not an accident that is shot like a horror movie. not accidental that happened. We've read in some of the reviews in the prequel, people talking about how good Andrew Garfield was. Everybody's great in this movie. Every performance is good, but Andrew Garfield is incredible in this movie. Lots of little moments. You mentioned some of them, but one in particular that really got me was when he's later in the film, he's been practicing his art and they're going to go show Madam his art to see if they can get a deferral, and he's showing it to Kathy, and she like compliments his art, and the way he says thank you in response to that, I feel like you could write a thesis on like how to act. It's incredible. There's so much conveyed in like those two words and the way he delivers it. Like, I literally almost cried just watching that. Oh my god, it got me so good. Like I said, I think he's just absolutely incredible in this, and that's again saying a lot because everybody is very good, but he's doing the most with his role.
The thing to me that this whole story was missing was any kind of whisper of resistance to this system. And I get that it's not the point of this particular story, but like the more that I thought about it, like as I was reading, I was like, where's the clone underground railroad where people are like smuggling them out of the donation system, or stories about clones rebelling by like drinking and smoking? Because that's what I would do.
That would have been super. I agree with this in general, but I think that would have been really interesting. And I think there's a very obvious opportunity with it when they're at the cottages and they're like going out
when
on
they're basically unsupervised.
For them to
that's when I would become a chain smoking alcoholic. You want my organs? Crack me open. You'll be real disappointed.
And I think there would be a lot of really interesting dynamic there because of the way they're already kind of awkward with interacting with the world, for them to and they don't really know much, like the whole interaction between Domhnall Gleeson and them about like the deferral system. They're like, we don't know what you're talking about, and like so that because they're so kind of sheltered and so I think them encountering somebody who like you said, was like they're out in the world and they run into somebody who's another clone, and that, like you said, the person is like chain smoking and like drinking and like is like super kind of similar to how Ruth is later, like super cynical and like, but like in a more actively protesting way.
Yeah.
Would have been very interesting. And I think you could have done that without taking away from. Because again,
I agree.
your point, I agree with your point that it's not what the story is doing, and so like you don't want to make it like a whole side plot or anything,
right?
But even just one brief encounter with somebody to give that, because you do think that for sure there would be people
for
like
sure
that.
There would be people doing that. That was the first thing I thought of. I'd be like, I would be doing meth,
right?
Like,
yeah,
fuck you, man.
Yeah, I do think it would have been interesting. And again, you have to find it because again, very clearly not the point, very clearly not the story that was trying to be told.
Yeah.
But it would have. I think there's a way to work something like that in that feels like it would have very readily or very obviously been a thing that happened, and have it be something that kind of plays against the dynamic that our characters have and their journey and stuff like that. I think it could have been really interesting.
Yeah. No, it's a totally different book.
Yeah.
But I think that book set in the same universe would be really interesting.
Yeah. And again, like I said, I think there is a totally different book that focuses more on that or even has a side plot of that. But again, I don't think you have to have it go that far. I think just bumping up against that other book, like our book bumping up against that book that is like this more like interesting thing about like the rebellion and or like what, the fight against the system and stuff. Just our characters even just brushing against that briefly to kind of see how it affects our characters would have been. And I don't think it even really I don't think you ultimately have it change much of anything but it could be something that sparks some of where Ruth's kind of cynicism comes from or something, you know what I mean? It could do something.
Well, and I think even if it doesn't like spark anything or like spur any of our characters to like take different actions necessarily, I think it could be an interesting parallel just to have them encounter someone who's like smoking, drinking, whatever, is an interesting parallel to like when you do grow up very sheltered, the first time that you encounter someone who engages in any kind of rebellious behavior, and speaking as someone who was pretty sheltered, you encounter that person and you're kind of just like, I didn't know that was an option.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that would have been really interesting. My last note here that I thought was kind of interesting, and I have to confirm this by like watching it again, and I didn't have time to, is that at the beginning, before the credit, like during the opening, there's not really opening credits, but briefly before the movie starts, we get these like panels of color, and then or like these like frames of different colors. They're like very muted colors. It's like a sand, like a purple, like a teal, and like a I don't know, there's like a handful of different colors. And then at the end, during the credits, those colors repeat. Like we get those same colors again, and they kind of cycle through. I think those colors are also each time we each time we move through time and like hit a different stage of the story, as the film is broken up, I think like that color reflects, I think we actually get that frame of color, in the film in that moment, and it also reflects kind of like where they are, like, and somehow it's like I'd have to go again. This is something I only kind of noticed during the end credits. I was like, oh wait, maybe they were doing something with those colors, and I just didn't have time to go back and look at it again. But I think there's something there. I would be really interested to go see, because I think we're kind of like the life cycle and like the kind of following it, and just that, I don't know. It's interesting. I want to go back and look at that more and see what's going on there. If you happen to know, if you noticed that, feel free to drop a comment and we'll talk about it in the next prequel. But anyways, and then my last note was just that the score for this film is stunning. I thought it was fantastic. We talked about in the prequel that the woman who scored it like won the Oscar, first woman to win an Oscar for best original score for not this movie, a different movie, but very effective, very just emotionally resonant at all the right times. It's maybe a little overwrought. I don't want to say overwrought because the whole film's kind of overwrought, but in a way that I think works. But you know what I mean? Like it's very emotionally manipulative, intentionally, and in a way that I think works. But I thought it was a great score. So All right, before we wrap up, wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, any of those places. Follow us, like us, whatever you got to do so you see our posts, because we would love to see what you have to say about Never Let Me Go. Very interested to get people's thoughts on this one. This is one of those, one of those films, books, whatever, where there's lots to talk about, lots to get from it, and it's all very dependent on you as a person has to say about it. So we would love to hear what you have to say. Find us on those social media platforms and let us know. If you want to do us another favor, you can head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever. I don't even know wherever you're listening to this podcast, drop us a little 5-star rating, write us a nice little review. Helps the show get out to more people. We'd appreciate that. And then finally, if you really want to support us, you can go over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for a few bucks a month. At $2, you get access to early release ad-free. $5, you get access to that, plus bonus content. Every month we put out a bonus episode. Last month we did Enchanted. And this month, very shortly here, we will be doing our episode on
Fighting with My Family.
Fighting with My Family. There you go. Every month we do a different thing, not book related, just kind of whatever we want to talk about. And do a little bonus episode for it. We're actually going to, and we're going to tease this now, we're actually going to put out one of our previous bonus episodes on the main feed soon here so that everybody can kind of get a taste for what that's like. And that will be on the menu. We let our patrons vote on what they wanted us to put out on the main feed for everybody to kind of get a little taste for and see, what those episodes are like. And if you want to come over and support us on Patreon to get more of those. So the episode on our review/discussion on the menu will be out, I don't know, sometime soon. Sometime here in the next week or two. So look out for that on the main feed. And then, get the Fighting with My Family review over on Patreon. And finally, if you support us for $15 a month, you get access to all that stuff, plus priority recommendation, which means that if there's something you would really like for us to talk about, a book, a movie, well, it has to be both, obviously. If there's a book, movie that you would like us to really talk about, you can suggest it. We'll support us for $15 a month. We'll add that as high up on our list as we can in our schedule and work that in. And this one was a patron request from
Steve from Arizona.
There you go. So thank you very much, Steve from Arizona. This is as far away from sci-fi as you've gotten, but it's still sci-fi. I say that. He might have recommended something other than sci-fi.
I think it is maybe the most notable departure-ish from sci-fi.
I'm trying to, I'm trying to think. There may be something else that I'm not remembering that he...
I don't always remember which things were requested by which patrons.
Once we're far enough removed, I don't remember who. Wrong. Yeah, but I think this may be the most removed from sci-fi, but it's still kind of sci-fi. So there you go. All right, Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
Never Let Me Go is one of those rare cases where I think the book and the movie are pretty close to even. If you're a fan of the book and you've never seen the movie, you're probably going to like it. Likewise, if you're a fan of the movie but you've never read the book, definitely give it a shot. The movie is a lovely, well-crafted film. The overall art direction is warm and cozy, a fun contrast to the story being told. The performances are stunning, and the script is a deft handling of the source material. However, as with many adaptations that we cover, the movie suffers from the fact that it's not a book. The book is able to cover much more ground in terms of the characters' backstories and their time at Hailsham. It's able to show us all of the complex intricacies of the relationships between Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy. It can spread out the world building in an interesting, subtle way that the movie can't quite accomplish. And of course, the real heavyweight being privy to Kathy's inner monologue and most intimate thoughts. In this case, I would genuinely recommend both the book and the movie. But for me, Ishiguro's writing elevates the book beyond the film. This one goes to the book.
There you go. Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are covering something that I am so excited to cover. We're going to be talking about Beastly, which is a young adult novel by Alex Flynn and its 2011 film adaptation, which is not very good.
Similarly, we're staying right in the same lane here, right? Right in the same wheelhouse of
For sure.
both style of literature and film.
And quality.
Yeah,
for
quality
sure.
and
I am so excited to cover this. I've been wanting to cover this one basically since we started doing this podcast.
yeah, no, it'll be interesting. I know very little of it. I think I've seen some people talk about the movie before, but I know almost nothing about it.
I have read this before and I have seen the movie, and there were some choices made.
Fantastic.
I'll say that much.
Can't wait. That'll be our next episode. In 2 weeks' time, we're talking about Beastly. In 1 week's time, we'll preview Beastly, but we'll also hear what you all have to say about Never Let Me Go. So make sure you head over to the social media and give us all that information. Oh, by the way, you can also email us. Not that anybody ever would, but you could. This film is lit.
Checking the email because I'm not.
That. Never mind. Don't email us. I don't look at the email. I thought maybe you did occasionally.
No.
Okay, maybe we got some email. Oh God, I'll go back and scroll through there. Never mind. But yeah, head over to any of the social media platforms. Drop us a little message. If you don't, for whatever, I guess this is the way I could say it. If for whatever reason you don't want we're going to read it on the thing. Never mind. If you want to be anonymous for some reason, you can send us a message. I guess.
Send us a DM if you want to be anonymous, and we'll just say that you're an anonymous contributor.
I guess that was my point. It's like if you wanted to send us something, and if you want to send us something and don't want to be have it attached to your name or whatever, you can just DM us and we will read it anonymously. Not that whatever. If that were something you wanted to do, that's gonna do it. Until 1 week's time when we hear what you all have to say about Never Let Me Go. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.